Remember the joy when President Robert Mugabe was forced out of power in 2017. That was then. And this is now. Under his successor, Emmerson Mnangagwa, same old, same old. In the last few days, a dozen reported dead, hundreds injured, and the government, for a time, switches off the internet. The spark was a hike in the price of petrol by 250%. The tinder, the continuing corruption under Zimbabwe's ultra-crooked ruling party, Zanu-PF.
This government is far worse than Robert Mugabe. And this is because they never changed the structures of governance when Mugabe left office. They simply took over and continued. And let us also remember that those who are running the country right now were Robert Mugabe's runners. They know his tactics. They are not seeking to change or transform from this path.
Mnangagwa's nickname is the Crocodile, and with reason. As head of Mugabe's secret police, he had a hand in the massacres of the Matabele in the 1980s. He managed to oust his boss in 2017, but under him the ruination of Zimbabwe's economy has continued.
He led us in our struggle for national independence.
It should be one of the richest countries in Africa. It isn't. At the end of Mugabe falls, and the great hope for Zimbabwe was that it wouldn't be as corrupt, it would get more clean. Has that transpired?
Doesn't seem to be the case. The economy has not picked up significantly, and the country's just been sliding further and further into a debt crisis that was really formed several years ago.
But at the heart of the problem is that although Mugabe has gone, his system has remained the same.
The crackdown is perhaps led by a paranoia within Zanu-PF that they might lose power and there might be a degree of retribution. And it's difficult to see how that really reconciles and turns around. It's hard for Zanu-PF suddenly to turn around and say we're the People's Party when there's so much abuse going on the streets.
The word from Zimbabwe House and its government back in Harare is simple: we've done nothing wrong, it's business as usual. The opposition say that means in practice more beatings, more corruption, more killings. The economy is in a mess. People can barely get by. So this cycle of ruin then violence, it looks set to continue. Zimbabwe is one of the most beautiful countries in Africa. Its people hard-working, kind, well-educated. Its tragedy is that rule by one tyrant seems to have given way to another.
That was John Sweeney. Let's cross live now to Harare, speak to our correspondent Andrew Harding. It's very hard, Andrew, to get figures on this, not least because of the internet shutdowns. But what are you seeing and hearing?
Well, we've had reports of 12 dead and 78 gunshot wounds, victims in the past few days. That's from civil society organisations, doctors. Today we've seen and heard reports of the clampdown continuing. I saw 2 men with gunshot wounds in a clinic here in Harare, and I saw another man just arriving. He said he'd been savagely beaten. He could hardly speak, in fact, and he was in such pain, but he said he'd been savagely beaten by police and military who'd pulled him out of his own house early this morning.
What's your sense about whether this crisis can be contained? Mnangagwa has cut short the trip to Davos. Is he in charge now?
I think he is. He's returning overnight tonight, we believe, to take control. His deputy, the man who, of course, helped him secure power by leading the coup against Robert Mugabe, has been sitting in for him. And there's talk about quite who is in charge between him and in the military. And, of course, one coup doesn't simply end the instability in a country. So who knows exactly what's going on behind the scenes. But yes, Mnangagwa is in charge. He has a plan. His finance minister is going to stay in Davos and is going to unveil his plan for reducing the debt, reforming the economy. And there have been changes made here over the last year or so. And, you know, things are improving in some small way. And yet the problem, as John identified there, fundamentally is that Zanu-PF is still the same unreformed group. A lot of crooks, a lot of cronies, a lot of thugs in there, and there is still this legacy of distrust and hatred from the last election here, which the opposition, which is very much in control in strongholds like Harare, they believe they were robbed of victory, and they are in no mood to allow Zanu-PF the space to try and fix the economy and to get the debt under control and so on.
Andrew Harding, thanks very much indeed. Thanks for joining us from there. Well, we're joined now by Magaisa, a former advisor to the opposition leader Morgan Tsangarai, and Xavier Zavare, a spokesperson for the governing party Zanu-PF. Thanks very much for coming in. Why is your government so scared of your people that you have to shut down the internet, create blackouts, drag a man from his house to beat him up by security forces? What is the fear that lies at the heart of your government that it can't even face its own people?
There's absolutely no fear for our government, for Zanu-PF, of our people. We have to take this in context and understand the context. We have a security situation because people have been allowed, the democratic space has allowed people to protest, to be on the streets, to show their unhappiness, but that is expected to be done in a peaceful way. But the situation we saw happening on Monday, protesters were barricading roads, stopping kids from going to school, stopping other citizens going on about their own business. There was violence, including, torching of a police station and killing of a police officer.
Without excusing the violence, you may understand where that comes from. Yeah. If you have the greatest fuel inflation prices in the world now, if you have a black market, if you have an internet shutdown so students can't even do their exams online, if you have crackdowns on protesters who go out before the violence even erupts, you can see why there is anger on the streets.
Now, we have still to understand the context. The internet was only shut down later on, and
but the temporarily has left 12 people dead, 78 people with gunshot wounds, and as you heard, a man being dragged from his home and beaten up.
It is very unfortunate. I mean, every death is regrettable, and no one should really die because of politics. No one really should be suffering because of political decisions that are made by politicians.
Forgive me, though, a death is more than regrettable. It's absolutely insane that you have started with a brand new leader, what could have been a brand new start, and the same old tactics of Mugabe that make it look like nothing has changed and he's worse than the last one.
Okay, things have really changed. One of the things that have changed significantly is the democratic space itself, which President Mnangagwa has created, which never used to happen, before. That is quite key. People are now free to insult the president. People are now free to express their anger on the streets.
Is this the rebirth of a democratic state, if you like? Is this what's happening, that there is more room to protest, so people are using it?
Well, what happened in November 2017, a lot of people thought that the departure of Mr. Mugabe was the rebirth of Zimbabwe, but that was a false hope. If I were to use a metaphor, this is a reptile which shed its skin, but it has remained true to character. These are the same people who were the henchmen for Mr. Mugabe. These are the same people who propped up Mr. Mugabe. We tried to tell the world that nothing had changed. And the last 12 months have demonstrated the truth of this matter. There is nothing that has changed. To suggest that democratic space has been opened up with what we have seen over the last 7 days is completely absurd.
Zanu-PF wants to carry on as if Mugabe hasn't gone.
No, I think it's being disingenuous to say that nothing has changed. Before Emmerson Mnangagwa got into power, you would not have the BBC reporting from Zimbabwe because it had been banned. So we now, it is now free. Any journalist is now free to practice journalism in Zimbabwe.
This is a fair point. I mean, we've certainly encountered that in the past. One of the points that Xavier made was that there are groups, there are henchmen, there are protests that have turned violent. Now, I don't know whether the opposition party controls those factions or whether you, the MDC, have lost control of them completely.
Well, you know, facts are very important, and it's very important for us to understand what has happened in the last 7 days. One of the things that has not been mentioned, and is not being mentioned here, is that people who support Zanu-PF, Zanu-PF youths, are the same people who were caught up by soldiers and policemen. They were arrested, and reports indicate that they were released from prison on orders of the political leaders. So these are Zanu-PF people who have actually been fomenting and causing trouble in the high-density areas and rural areas. These are the people who have been beating up people. And to suggest that there is democratic space when the internet has been shut down, when social media is shut down, it's completely ridiculous.
It's impossible for me to know, you know, who is fomenting this stuff at the centre, but it is an extraordinary place to be. That the coup in this country is coming from within his own party.
Absolutely.
Within Zanu-PF, I know he's denied the rumours, but it's a weird thing to have to come back and do if there's nothing to it. Why isn't the coup coming from the opposition?
Well, you know, the opposition has always maintained its position that the election last year was a stolen election, and they've challenged the legitimacy of this government. They've never been amused by the fact that the opposition is refusing to accept that result. And of course, within Zanu-PF itself, the biggest enemy is the economy. They may have stolen the election, but the economy itself has given them a vote of no confidence.
And that is your whole slogan, that Zimbabwe is open for business. He jumps off on a jet to tell everyone it's open for business. He goes to Davos to tell Davos it's open for business, and you can't even use the internet?
Well, you see, what we have here is, it's one thing crying for the internet. I'm sure any investor or any business would really invest in Zimbabwe even without the internet.
Really? You think your government could shut down the internet and then invite people to come to the country with the most expensive fuel and no means of communication?
But what is important here is we have roads being barricaded. We have buildings being torched on fire. We have protesters who... The MDC basically has lost control of its supporters. And the government here takes corrective measures to secure all the other citizens.
He keeps saying that it's your supporters that are out of control.
Can I just point out, the reason why people went into the streets on Monday was because of the fuel hikes, was because of the economic deterioration, was because of the failure by this government to live up to its promise. This is an issue between the government and its citizens. And Zanu-PF is very adept at trying to find scapegoats, and that's what they're trying to do. For them, they have to find a scapegoat, and that scapegoat is the MDC. Unfortunately, they don't have anything to put on Nelson Chamisa. They don't have anything to put on Tendai Biti. And so they continue to raise this issue, this rhetoric. If they have issues against Nelson Chamisa or Tendai Biti or any of the MDC top leaders, they would arrest them. They don't have that.
We're out of time.
It's not a matter of arresting them, but it is a matter of us as Zimbabweans singing from the same hymn sheet that we want development for our country, which your party is not doing.
You don't develop
We're out
a
of
country
time,
by
folks, but
beating people.
Thank you very much. Thank you.